So people ask like, should I do that too? That's good marketing, right? And it's like, yeah, it can be really effective marketing, but if that's the only reason that you're doing it, then like I wouldn't. The reason that I do it is because it's part of our mission, right? Of helping creators earn a living, whether it's another SaaS founder trying to follow in ConvertKit's footsteps, or someone trying to like learn from what I've been doing on the blog and content side. And the reason is that I think these real world examples make a huge difference.
Welcome to Entrepreneur's Handbook Podcast, where we tell inspiring startup stories with practical takeaways for you, the listener. Today's guest is Nathan Barry. He is the founder of the email marketing platform ConvertKit. He started off as a freelance web designer and design book author before turning to the SaaS world. ConvertKit now powers the audience for over 20,000 creators, including Gretchen Rubin and Tim Ferriss. The company is 100% bootstrapped, and Nathan has revealed his company's finances at every point of his journey. Because of this, I can tell you that ConvertKit's MRR is currently $2,464,976. And you can see this yourself publicly too. Nathan is refreshingly transparent about his journey, and there's so much you can learn from him. I hope you enjoyed today's episode.
Welcome to Entrepreneur's Handbook, Nathan. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thanks for having me on.
So I'm really curious about your background story, because you started off as a content creator and now you've gone into the SaaS world and been massively successful. Can you tell us about why you got into entrepreneurship in the first place?
I got into entrepreneurship because I was looking for ways to make money. I grew up in a family where money was really scarce. And so I watched my parents fight about money. I watched like money impact what food was on the table, if food was on the table, all of those things. And so I thought, okay, when I grow up, I'm going to know how to make money and, however that's best done, whatever job I'm going to get. But also no one wanted to hire like a 10-year-old. And so then that kind of turns you to entrepreneurial things. So whether it's dog sitting when people are out on vacation and you take care of their dogs and cats, we would charge $10 a day in the neighborhood to go over and like take care of the animals for the day. So actually, like if someone went on a week-long vacation, I'd make $70. And as a 12-year-old or whatever, that was fantastic, especially for the amount of effort, because you're going over there for like 30 minutes twice a day, 20, I don't know, but like it was usually pretty easy. So that was something. I also was into woodworking. Everyone in my family is very handy. My dad built the house we grew up in. And so I would go around and make like wood projects. So like wall art and other things, and then sell it like door to door in the neighborhood. And then later at craft fairs and that kind of thing. So I was always looking for ways to make money. And then that turned into a really good, reliable path when I got introduced to web design and, learned both the code side and the visual design aspect of it. Started doing freelance design, started a small agency with a couple of friends that ultimately failed, but we made it a ways, and then got into building software and working for a startup and kind of on from there. But really the drive was to figure out how to make money so that I didn't have to worry about there not being enough money.
And with that drive, obviously, now that you've made the money and you're doing well for yourself, what motivates you today? Is it still the same thing? Do you still have that same drive from when you were younger, or has the goals shifted?
Yeah. So Jason Fried, who was one of the co-founders of Basecamp, he talks about how making money is a skill, just like playing the drums or the piano or anything else. And that was a really eye-opening thing for me, because I was like, oh, okay, I wouldn't expect to just be like sit down at the piano and be able to play like a concerto or something, you would have to practice and work up to it for years and years and years. And so I was like, oh, if that's true for making money, then let me practice the component parts. Learning copywriting is like learning this, to play scales or something like that, right? It's all these individual skills that go into it. And so when you think about what motivates you now, people talk about money as if like having enough versus not. This is enough, that wasn't enough. Once I have, I don't know, whatever number, right? Then it will be enough. But no one talks about playing the piano that way or playing the drums. I'm not like, well, you know how to play the piano. Why are you still doing it? You're like, because it's fun. I enjoy it and I can always get better. And so for me, that's part of making money is like, it's fun. I really enjoy it. And there's more skills to learn. I can continue to get better. And then the other part that's true for, if we're running with this music example, is that it provides value for others, right? It's true for music, and it's true for, the things I'm doing on the internet, as far as it might not be a beautiful concert that I'm putting on for people, but, I'm helping them earn a living. Like, I have this plaque behind me that says, "We exist to help creators earn a living." And that's ConvertKit's mission statement. And so I think of it as, like, not only am I making money from it, and I have plenty of money now, that's not the main driver anymore, but it's creating the tools and the education and the inspiration for everyone else following along, who is like, can see themselves and go, "Oh, that could be me. I could go, build an audience and earn a living, as a creator." So that's really what drives me now, is like that mission.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people don't think about that enough, in terms of entrepreneurship being a skill that you can keep testing and you keep learning and getting better at, just like playing the piano or any other hobby. When you're enjoying what you're doing, then it helps, right? Because if you only wanted to do your businesses because you want to put food on the table, you passed that point a long time ago. So it seems like it's now moved to more of the intrinsic motivation of how much you're enjoying it and the satisfaction you get from providing value to others instead. And with ConvertKit, I guess, were you solving your own problem when you started it?
Yeah. So when I started ConvertKit, I'd gotten into building an audience, and I'd written and published 2 books, actually, self-published. So one was called the App Design Handbook, which was all about designing iPhone and iPad applications, which is what I was spending most of my time doing. And then the next one was called Designing Web Applications, which was probably like a 30% similar book, a lot of similar concepts, but in a different genre. Because a bunch of people came across the first book and said, "This is awesome. I love the format, but like, I don't do iOS, write one for the web." So I'd done those 2 books. I'd learned the power of email marketing. I'd built an email list to a couple thousand people. I'd learned the value of selling digital products, because these books, the first book sold $12,000 in the first day. The next book sold $26,000 in the first day in these launches. And I was blown away that email was selling more copies than like every social channel, the guest post, everything else I'd done. It was the email list that was driving the most results. So I was intrigued by that. And I was really looking to do something that had recurring revenue, because these big spikes of revenue, would come in for like the launch week, and then it'd drop off a lot, because that was your main promotion, and it would continue to sell, but it'd sell at a few $1,000s a month or something like that, rather than the level that I wanted. So it's like, oh, if I had recurring revenue, then, I could just run this business. It'd be stable. It'd be predictable. Actually, my wife and I at the time wanted to start a coffee shop. And I remember thinking that a coffee shop is a terrible business, but let me just make the consistent money online. And then that way I don't have to worry about like the stress of trying to run a coffee shop and use the revenue from it to pay, our bills and all of that. And I had thought like, okay, if I could get a recurring business to $5,000 a month, that would cover all of our bills. And then as I do a coffee shop, I could pursue, it'd just be nicely balanced. So that was part of it. And then the other thing is, when I was looking for an idea, I was starting to love email marketing. I was like using MailChimp because that's, what was free, what I started with. And then, I was hacking around it in all these different ways. How do you deliver like a free incentive to get someone to opt in? What can you do with automations? And it was just like building on this and trying to figure out what to do, and really finding it quite clunky. Like, it was made for generic small businesses. It wasn't made for like an online creator like me. So I was using my background in code to like hack around it, write custom forms, fill in all the gaps. And that's when I decided like, okay, I'm going to go build a product with recurring revenue that solves this email issue for people like me. And so that's how ConvertKit was born. That was January 1st, 2013 that I started working on it. So we're at 9 years, 1 month and 14 days.
So I've run courses about how to build an email list myself. And as part of that, I made different videos depending on which platform people were using. So at the time, I was using Substack myself. So I did it for Substack, I did it for ConvertKit, all the different ones. And by making those videos, that's when I decided to switch to ConvertKit, because that's when I realized how much easier everything was to do in ConvertKit. So I was making these videos and realizing, well, I have to do 100 steps for this platform. And in ConvertKit, I just press a button. And I think, in a way, that's the best way for me to have learned which platform to use, is by teaching other people and realizing, wait, this one is way better than what I'm doing at the moment. And that's how you gain me as a customer.
There was something where, what was it? We were building our automations product. So the visual automations, you can send people down branches and all of this. We were adding features to it. And I was doing a lot of customer interviews, trying to understand, okay, what do people want it to do? I was talking to someone who had used ConvertKit in the early days before we had the visual automations, had switched to ActiveCampaign for it. And they were showing me how they do all this in ActiveCampaign. And I was asking, what's frustrating about it? And they talked about how slow it was, not only how many steps, but also the load time in between every step. And so I said, okay, here's a new ActiveCampaign account. You already know what you're building. Like I could do it, but I'd be slow because I don't know the product. I don't know ActiveCampaign. You know it. So we're going to do a screen recording and you build this from scratch. And I want to see the problem that you're talking about. And he built it out and so he knew exactly what he was building and he wasn't adding content, right? It was just emails and flows and all that. It took him 14 minutes, start to finish, to build out this flow that he already knew exactly what he was doing. And so that video was kind of my milestone where I was like, okay, the end result was fantastic, but the process to get there was really painful. And most of this 14 minutes is waiting for, it's just clicking, waiting for it to load, all that. 14 minutes sounds fast, I'm realizing, but imagine that you're not actually doing any content writing, When we built the visual automations for ConvertKit, my goal was that same workflow, but crazy fast. And so when I brought it back to him and showed it to him, you could, go through it and build that same thing. I think it was 65 seconds as far as time to build it in. And really the difference is just that, well, one, we made everything load quickly. We focused in the product, all of that. But we've always built the things that we want. As a creator, I want to be able to get in, build my automation, create my landing page, whatever, set it live and get back to creating. I'm not obsessive over how do I make the perfect funnel, or I don't want to spend my whole day perfecting email marketing. I want to spend it creating. And so that's why so many things that you're seeing in the product where you're like, oh, this is just easy to use, or this is just straightforward. And it's because yeah, we don't want you spending all day in the product. We want you just building it and then getting back to, whatever form of creating you do.
Yeah. And in those early days, it must have been quite a steep curve in order to get to that kind of level. How did you go about that? Because obviously you had yourself as a test customer, but how did you win those early customers? Was it people from your own email list who were following you, who were potentially interested in the product? Or
yeah, so I had a couple thousand people on my email list who had come in for the design books. And so that was the very beginning of the audience. There's some overlap, right? If you're interested in a design book, there's a little bit of overlap to maybe I want to grow an email list or an audience, but not a lot. So the first little bit was from that. Some more is there's this trend now, people talk about it on Twitter of build in public. We always said work in public. And it's a trendy thing now. But I did it with ConvertKit in 2013, where I started something called the Web App Challenge, where I was saying, I'm going to grow ConvertKit to $5,000 a month in recurring revenue within 6 months. I'm going to do it with only $5,000 in my own capital. The rest is going to be just my time and then customer finance, or through, sold through pre-orders and then revenue from customers. And in doing that, one, I didn't hit any of those goals, just to be clear. We can get into that, but it took way longer and cost way more money. But in doing that and telling the story along the way, I wrote blog posts every week. Here's how I chose the name. Here's how I hired a developer. Here's how we did validation. Here's the latest on design. And so that built a bit of a following in itself. At the end of 6 months, we were at $2,000 a month in recurring revenue, largely from people following the projects, people already on my email list, saying oh, this is interesting, let me sign up. And some direct sales and outreach for the pre-orders. But then things tapered off, right? That was the first 6 months. From there, it really, I would struggle to find a channel to grow past that. So it was actually a year and a half into the project that a friend named Heaton Shaw pulled me aside and was like, hey, this isn't working. you need to either, you're a year and a half in, you're at now like 1,500 a month in revenue. You need to shut this down, or like double down on it and take it really seriously. And thankfully, I took his advice, doubled down on it, and then I really took a direct sales approach. So I actually put in more money, hired a full-time developer on it to make the product better, and then we started scaling it up. And so it took a couple months to go from 1,500 a month to 2,000 a month. And that's where we're at in January 2015. January 2015 was 2,000 a month in revenue. And that year we grew from 2,000 to 100,000 a month, largely through like first direct sales, outreach, doing the manual migrations to switch people over. And then ultimately from there, it was scaling it, using affiliates, word of mouth. And then we got into webinars and everything else. But that was kind of the early traction.
So before that time, how much were you spending on ConvertKit a week? Was it something that was very much on the side, or what was your kind of time dedication to it?
Yeah, so I'd say it was 20 hours a week for the first 6 months. I was about to say I was working on it as my main thing, but I actually wrote another book called Authority in that time. So like if I'm actively writing a book, it couldn't have been, my full-time thing. And then I think as it lost traction, as it stalled out, I worked on it less and I probably dropped down to about 10 hours a month. And so that was for about a year of like maybe 10 hours up to 20 hours when I was feeling particularly motivated. So yeah, that was not a huge amount of time. And then when I went all in on it, I stopped doing the blog and the books, and like I let them keep selling. And the idea was that they would keep like, this nice even, maybe they'll still sell like $10,000 a month and maintain that. And really it dropped off so quickly when I wasn't working on it. So yeah, I then focused 100% on ConvertKit, stopped working on the side projects or the other projects, and just grew ConvertKit. So an interesting thing about that is I had a huge revenue drop because I was making about $250,000 a year from the books and courses. And then when I focused on ConvertKit, that pretty quickly went to like maybe 40,000 a year, somewhere in there. So it disappeared entirely. And so I started dipping into savings and cashing out investments and that kind of thing in order to pay our bills. Cause it was probably another 18 months before I took a paycheck from ConvertKit. We were at probably 250,000 a month in revenue, maybe 300,000 a month in revenue before I actually took a paycheck from ConvertKit. So it was interesting as a creator, just going from like full-time job, making $60,000 a year, to freelance creator making like $100,000 a year, to like selling books and courses to, making $250,000 a year, to like SaaS founder making like $30,000 a year, and then up again the other side from there. So
with the amount you're making each month in revenue, where was all of that going if you weren't taking a salary? Was that all being pumped back into the business? Were you hiring and growing the team more, or?
Yeah, we were growing so fast. So like when we were at $100,000 a month, we were growing 20 to 25% month over month. So that was completely crazy. And we were hiring people as fast as we could. There was a time, actually at that 100,000 a month level, we had maybe 20 grand or so in the bank and 100,000 a month in revenue and like 97,000 a month in expenses. So we were technically profitable and like our cash balance was growing. But what happens is revenue and expenses are growing so fast and your cash is growing, but at such a slow rate that if you think about your cash as a metric of like days worth of expenses, and like it's actually shrinking from that perspective. And so that was kind of a scary time. And we just needed as many people as possible on support and development, and like the app was going down. Like we just needed everything. So we poured every dollar into trying to, maintain it and keep it going. And I actually set out to raise money then. I was already in San Francisco for a conference called SaaSter. And, it was like 4,000 SaaS founders there and tons of investors. And so I went there to that conference and decided to raise money. We had the growth numbers. I felt like it was a good fit. And because we had no cash, I was like, I don't know how else to handle this. I probably took meetings with 10 investors there. All of them went terribly except for one. And actually the one that went well, his name's Tamaz Tanga, is from Redpoint, which they're, really well-known venture firm. He's actually a ConvertKit customer now, which is fantastic. He has a really popular blog on like SaaS metrics and everything else. All the investors except for Tamaz said like, your target market of bloggers and creators is way too small. Like this will never work. And I probably honestly pitched it really poorly. Like I didn't know what I was doing. I was, probably. I didn't even have a pitch deck at this point, right? I was just starting conversations. So no one was interested except for Tamaz. But Tamaz was saying like, he completely got it. But he was saying like, I don't know that you want to raise money. Like you're far enough along in this bootstrap path. Like think hard if you actually want to raise money. But if you do, like call me. I'll write a check, So that was great. And I was thinking about it. And then I talked to Mike McDermott, who's the founder of FreshBooks. And I happened to meet him at the conference. Someone introduced him as like, oh, this is my friend Mike from Toronto. And I was like, oh, hi Mike, nice to meet you. And then like after they leave, another guy's like, that was Mike, like the CEO of FreshBooks, right? I was like, I did not know that. Like I have questions for him, Anyway, so I ended up tracking him down at the conference. He was generous enough. We spent a little time just sitting down to coffee. And he really encouraged me to use the fast growth rate to get profitable. And he said, like, look, I know you feel like you can't, like you have to spend every dollar as soon as it's coming in just to maintain the health of the business and like just to keep up. But he was saying like, you can do it. You can freeze hiring, don't raise expenses, and you can grow your way into profitability and a meaningful cash balance. And so he sort of gave permission to do that. And really what we did then, probably when he said that, we were like 125,000 a month in revenue and 3% profit margins and maybe 11 people on the team, I think. And what we did from there was over the next 6 months, or 5 months, we only hired one person. We were super careful with expenses, and we ended up growing from 3% to 52% in profit margins during that time. We grew the business 2.5 times, I think, to like 300,000 a month in revenue around that time. And we got 3 months of expenses saved up in the bank. And then once we hit that, we did a couple things. We did a bunch of hiring that we needed to do because we'd like delayed it, So I think we hired 5 people that month and maybe more. We hired a lot of people, developers, content, sales, bunch of different roles kind of really quickly. And then we celebrated by having a team retreat. And so we flew everyone out to the mountains outside of Boise, Idaho, where I am, and met together in person for the first time. So it was a pretty wild ride, but that was like going from totally stressed out about money to like actually being in control of our destiny and having cash in the bank. And we've had, 3 months of expenses in the bank ever since.
So I guess as well, you're building a remote company before it was the cool thing to do that is now. And
we're just hipsters.
Did you ever consider moving to LA or Silicon Valley or Austin or any of these tech hubs when you were building the business? Or did you want to make sure that you stuck in Idaho where you were from and where you were comfortable?
Yeah, so my wife was incredibly supportive of building the business. Like even at times when we were going all in on it, putting all of our savings in. That was the other thing that I didn't articulate is when I made this decision, ConvertKit's at $1,500, $1,800 a month in revenue. And I made the decision to stop doing the business that was making money and go all in on this. I also cashed out all of our retirement accounts, and all of our savings, which we'd bought a house and put a bunch of money into that. So we didn't have a lot left. So we took 50 grand and put it into the business. And my wife was was supportive of that. The only thing she wouldn't have been supportive of is moving somewhere else, I think. I never brought it up really, but if I was like, hey, let's move, us and our 2 little kids to Austin or somewhere else, away from family, she'd be like, not going to happen. So yeah, we've always been based in Boise. I think there's 7 people, maybe 8 on the ConvertKit team who are in Boise, out of 68 people total on the team. So there's no office here. There's nothing like that. It's just happened to have hired some good people here.
How did you do those initial hires as well then? Was it people you knew already, or was it completely out of the blue?
Yeah, so it was from 2 places. People I knew already, and then from my blog, right? Because I'd been blogging this whole process, and I now had thousands of people on the email list. So like the very first developers I worked with were all following along the blog. There's a gentleman named Mark Boquet who he's based in Barcelona. He's our longest running developer. And he like emailed me when I started doing the web app challenge in 2013 and said, hey, like, I'd love to start working with you and like help you build this app. And all these years later, he's still been working on ConvertKit. He's actually, we're releasing currencies for ConvertKit Commerce because at the moment, it's only US dollars that we sell in, and we're rolling out all the other currencies. And so Mark's the one just building that out, and I just saw a pull request go by as he's got that almost done, and it's amazing that all these years later he's doing that. A good friend, her name's Ashley, who I've recruited her to run all of our operations. She's now scaled that team. Like the very first thing she did was like set up our LLC and stuff like that, and now she's doing that at a almost $30 million a year company and has scaled all that up. And so I would say probably 1/3 of the initial hires were people I already knew, and 2/3 were from my blogging community. Yeah, having an audience as you build a SaaS product is a pretty big advantage.
Yeah, and I really think that shows the advantage of somebody who's got the blog and the creation side of things, because then people know what you're doing, people can align themselves with your mission. And I guess also when they come to apply as well or talk to you, they already know your story. So they already know whether or not they think they fit in or not. Whereas if it's a black box, then they might think they're coming for something. And I guess it also helps with retention is that they already have a good idea about what you're about because you're so transparent online. Was it ever scary at the beginning to be that transparent, to put all the numbers out there, especially when things might not have gone as well as you hoped they would?
Yeah. Well, let's see. I often get asked if people, if I get asked if people think that I should or that they should be transparent with their numbers, right? Because with ConvertKit, I've been transparent about everything from day one. All of our financials have been like public on a dashboard, updated in real time. ConvertKit.baremetrics.com. If anyone wants to look at it. And it's been that way for, 8 years or more. So people ask like, should I do that too? That's good marketing, right? And it's like, yeah, it can be really effective marketing, but if that's the only reason that you're doing it, then like I wouldn't. The reason that I do it is because it's part of our mission, right? Of helping creators earn a living, whether it's another SaaS founder trying to follow in ConvertKit's footsteps or someone trying to like learn from what I've been doing on the blog and content side. And the reason is that I think these real world examples make a huge difference. In probably March 2012, I was reading the website Hacker News, and I came across these 2 posts by 2 different designers that happened to go live on the same day. And they had each written ebooks about design. Sasha Grief had written a book called Step by Step UI Design. And I remember it was like a small guide, and he was selling it for $6 for the guide, or if you bought for $12, you get like his Photoshop files and other stuff with it. So he had those 2 packages. And this other guy, Jared Drysdale, had written a book called Bootstrapping Design, which was like a full-length self-published book. And he was selling it, I think, for either $29 or $39. I can't remember which. And I was fascinated by that because here's designers like me. I was a designer, who were doing this self-publishing thing and making money. And they both wrote blog posts for Jason Cohen, who founded WP Engine. Like Jason saw this and said, this is fascinating that you both launched on the same day, totally by chance, and you have totally different pricing models. So come on my blog and explain why your pricing model is better. And so through that, I got to learn that I think Sasha made $6,000 in the first 48 hours and Jared made $8,000, I think. And so I saw that representation of here are people like me with small audiences who are designers who, have a similar background to me. If they can do it, I can too. And so that had such a huge impact on me that I've always tried to pay that forward, right? Of sharing my whole story and then doing it in a way, right? ConvertKit's making over $2 million a month right now, right? There's a lot in there that's not that relatable. If someone's just getting started and they're like, trying to make $2,000 a month. That's why I try to talk about the early story. But let's say your SaaS app is at $25,000 a month and you're struggling with churn. Well, in that case, you can now go on our public Baremetrics page and like filter the dates and go back to, okay, when ConvertKit was making $20,000 a month, what was their churn? What was their growth rate? What other things were in there? So it's not just like little snapshots here and there. It's like leaving the whole thing for them to figure out. And so I'm trying to set that whole example because that's a core part of my mission rather than it just being a marketing tactic. I think for most people who share their metrics online, it's just a marketing tactic.
And I guess it's like what you said there as well in terms of the remote work is that you were doing it before it was cool to do again. So you're trend setting, I guess, with both the building public and the remote work. Have you had it in the past where people have challenged you on your numbers? Because I imagine there's some people who putting yourself out there and putting the numbers out there so vulnerably can sometimes attract people who maybe aren't happy for your success. And how did you deal with that?
One thing that's nice about SaaS numbers is they're really confusing. So you talk in terms of like MRR and churn, and you're like, oh, net revenue churn. What's your ARPU? What's your CAC or LTV? Right? And no one knows what these, like in the general public, you have no idea what all these terms mean. And so I think there are, maybe some haters that you get who understand it. Or we've had people point out, like we've had someone, in the early days, right, cancel their product. They're like, because the ConvertKit sucks as a tool, and then like point to our churn rate, which churn for early SaaS products is always going to be high, especially if you're targeting like a small business, or consumer type customer. And so they would point out like our high churn rate and then like use it to like see like the product sucks and see everyone else thinks so too, and like point to the high churn rate. So there'd be discouraging things like that. But otherwise, the metrics are set up in such a way that, industry experts tend to understand them. And generally, if you understand the metrics, you know how hard it is to do anything in SaaS. And so you're usually more like, good job, keep going, rather than, jealous of someone's success or whatever else. So I would say for me, it's been a net positive. Another thing that's helpful is if you're running a SaaS company, or you and I are catching up and chatting, and I'm like, how's business? There's this idea, I don't know how it is in the UK, but in the US, like people don't talk financials and specifics. If I was like, hey, what's your salary? They'd be like, what? That's like a social taboo. You don't go there. And so if I asked how's business, and you're like, oh, it's going really well, the thing that would be most common for you to talk about would be headcount. How many people do you have on your team? So you'd say like, oh, it's going really well. We just hired 5 more people. Or we have big growth plans for the year. We plan to double the size of the team. And what happens is you start to conflate the number of people you have on your team with the success of the company, which I don't know if you know, but people are wildly expensive to employ. And so if that's your metric for success, you're probably going to end up running out of money or like not being profitable. And all because we're just trying to approximate. We're trying to say like, instead of saying, hey, revenue grew from 20,000 a month to 40,000 a month, we're like, oh, the team grew from 15 people to 30 people, or those numbers could never support 15 to 30 people, but you get the idea. And so what I like talking about revenue is if someone's like, how was last month? I'm like, it was okay. We grew net new MRR by $15,000. And I'm like actually telling you in the same numbers that I track internally. So I'm not like playing this weird game of approximation into other numbers and then subconsciously optimizing for the wrong thing. So it's just another reason that I think transparency is good. And the last thing on transparency is a lot of people who think it's crazy that, the level of transparency, like what you put on the internet, how much money you make, or as a company, you share your financials. It's like, okay, well, 2 examples. One, in the United States, in most states, if you work for the government in any way, so you're a police officer, a school teacher, anything like that, there are public databases for every state where you can go look up any person's salary because like you're an employee of the public, right? And so that's just part of the public databases. So like I had a friend who his aunt was like freaking out about what he was publishing in his blog post. Like, I can't believe you put your salary numbers publicly. And he goes back to her and like, you're a teacher in the state of Illinois. Like here's your set, like, like it's just in the database. Your numbers are public, which freaked her out a little bit, but anyway, so it's not that rare. And then the other thing on the company side, like all publicly traded companies have to disclose all their financials. And so what you end up with is these little tiny companies who are okay sharing their financials because it's not impactful. And then these giant companies who are, required by the SEC to share their financials. And I think what's missing is like the middle normal companies who are like go totally dark as they grow from like 200,000 a year in revenue to, I don't know, 100 million a year in revenue, right? And no one, like, there's not details there. And so I just try to share all the financials to like tell a complete story. So
I'm smiling because I think I've had this exact same conversation yesterday with people I met. And obviously people ask, oh, wow, you've changed your career and now you're doing your own thing. And they say, oh, how's it going? And you don't quite know what to say, right? So you say it's going well, yeah. And I've recently hired a few people to work for me. So I use that. And it's funny you were saying that as your example, because that's what I was using as my proxy to say the money is going well because I've been able to hire people.
When you could have said the money is doing well, making things up, right? I'm now making $5,000 a month from this, or I've now replaced my old salary, or like whatever else. But for some reason, that's tacky. It's disclosing too much. It's bragging. I don't know what it is, but we've all collectively decided as a society that that's not okay. And so now we're going to use these weird approximations when in reality, it'd just be so much easier if you're like, here's the number.
And it's funny as well, because the people who are asking how well it's going, what they really mean is how much are you earning, but they can't ask that. And then you can't answer that. So it's a weird game of where they want to know that, but they don't feel like they're okay to ask it. But if you just say it, then you feel like you're bragging. So this is cat and mouse game. And that's why it's really interesting that you've done it from the beginning in that way. And you also, for example, with the employee profit shares, I've seen that as well. That's public information. I've worked at companies before where, because that's all black box, and sometimes you don't know where you can go. So if you get promoted or if you are doing well, you don't know your potential. And that's seen in the past where people have quit their jobs or moved companies because they thought that the next band was actually lower than it was. So they thought, if I get promoted, I'm going to earn this much. And actually, they've been earning way more. The company could have kept that employee if they'd just been upfront about what was going on.
Well, so the times, I agree with that, and I'll touch on that in a second. The times that transparency loses is when you have discrepancies, right? Like I like to think about if my salary spreadsheet were to get leaked publicly and someone were to go through that in detail, what problems would it create? Right? And in most companies, it would create a lot of problems because we would find out pretty quickly that whoever you hired 5 years ago has been getting like 5% or 10% raises from this low number. And then you just went and hired someone for the same job this year. And after 5 years, like they've made it up, a certain amount. And the new person you hired is at a higher rate because that's actually the market rate. But this person has been happy because you've been like promoting them as they go, I guess, right? And so you're paying one person $80,000 and the other $100,000 for the same job. Or we're going to find out like the gender pay difference, right? Because men tend to negotiate salaries and women tend not to negotiate salaries. And so we're going to find for the same role, you're paying the man $100,000 and the woman $90,000, right? And like there's just all kinds of problems that'll come up. So if you are in that situation, then like transparency is going to hurt you because you've kind of been doing like shady things and getting away with it because it's in the dark. I believe that will come back to bite you eventually. The proverbial you, not you specifically. On the transparency side, things that benefit us is having these systems. So we have two of them that are really important. One is we run standardized salaries. So we buy salary data from a company called Radford, which is aggregating mostly U.S. salary data, but there's some international. And so we can come to like a national average for each role, and then we have to do some work to like map it all together. But the result is that we can publish a salary spreadsheet where okay, an engineer level 3 makes this, an engineer level 4 makes that. If I were to switch from being an engineer to being a designer, here's what it would mean. And you have that whole path. And that's really valuable because then people inside the company can talk about salaries because it's like, if I know you're an engineer level 3, I can just look at the spreadsheet and I know what your salary is. Or like we just promoted one of our engineering managers just last week, right? And so I announced that in the company meeting, like we celebrated him as like getting this new promotion. And if anyone was like, I wonder what he makes now, like that's super easy to see there. And he doesn't have to hide it, right? And he could talk about like, yeah, and it was really exciting. Like I'm so excited for this $20,000 a year raise that comes from it or whatever. And that would be great. The other thing is that we run open books. So externally, to the public, we like all of our SaaS metrics are shared, like revenue, churn, et cetera. But then internally within the business, we share all of our expenses as well. So you get the full picture of not just what's coming into the business, but also where we're spending it. And so then at any time, in any given month, someone could calculate like how much money went into the profit sharing pool. So it's a very public, transparent system. When you do that, it all has to be system driven. It means you can't have one-off negotiations. It's more work to put up front. We didn't do it all up front. We like gradually standardized it over time, because early on the goal is to just build a business that survives. But it's turned into something really good.
Yeah. And you said when you started off, the aim was just to make $5,000 a month. And obviously you're now at way higher than that. And you've got 68 employees, you said. Considering what your ambitions were, have you found it difficult to do that scaling and to manage such a large team now? Was there any hard lessons you learned along that path?
One that comes to mind right away is when you go from being a solo, founder or whatever else, working, building your company, feedback and communication isn't that important. And this is another, I don't know, like social tendency or personality trait of we tend to not want to give people difficult news or like tell them when they're screwing up. And so then we like sugarcoat it a bunch of, and like tone it down. And one thing as a company grows, you have to be so direct. And so building a culture where everyone's, willing to pull someone aside and say like, look, man, the level of quality on this project, like I know you're capable of better. Like the bar's here, you didn't hit it. Like I'm here to help you. And that's one of the most important things. Because if you get a culture where people are like, yeah, Nathan's not pulling his weight, like it's not working out. But then no one says that to me to my face or tells each person, then you build a pretty harmful culture. So I think that direct feedback is one of the most important things.
Yeah. And did you have periods where you felt that culture wasn't quite there yet? And did you make any changes to make sure that you had that direct feedback culture?
There's this idea that, if you're managing people, right, one person you're managing comes to you with a problem and is talking about this other person, right? And is saying they're not doing their work, all the stuff that they're doing poorly. And you as a manager, your tendency is to be like, wow, thanks for telling me. Like, let me take on all that. I'll go talk to this other person. We'll go solve this problem. And really what happens is you undermine a culture of direct feedback because now it's always like, go to the manager will solve it, is the first thing. And then also you just made a whole bunch of work for yourself. Like imagine you have 5 one-on-ones on a Wednesday and each one of them has something like that. You get to the end of your one-on-ones and like you have so much work to do and so many conversations to have that like you're going to be emotionally drained and have just no time in the day. And so the thing that you do instead is to say, wow, thank you so much for bringing that up to me. It shows that you really care to bring this up. And then what you talk about is like in our culture, it's really important that you go talk to the person directly about it. So I'm going to assume that you're telling me this for either one of 2 reasons. One, you are planning to have that conversation with them, but you didn't quite know how it would go. And so you wanted to talk through it with me first, right? To get clear on what the problem is actually, what the feedback you want to give. It's helpful to talk through it with someone so you could get clear on it before talking to them directly. Or 2, maybe you're worried about how that conversation will go and you'd like someone to be there with you to sort of help facilitate it and make sure that everyone stays calm and the feedback's actually heard and maybe rephrase something if it's said poorly, any of that. So which one is it? And would you like me to, like, when's the conversation going to happen? And do you need me to be there to help facilitate? And what happens is it's like this magic thing where instead of someone dumping all their problems on you as a manager and then you having to go solve it, you get to facilitate them going directly to the person. And usually they're like, yeah, well, I guess I'll reach out now. And no, I think I can handle it without you being there, you know? And so that little question of like, when's the conversation happening? And, you know, do you need me to be there is like a management superpower. And it builds such a great culture of people. Like I've seen a bunch of times where like I'll notice some tension between two people in our company on like a team meeting or something like that. And then later I'll hear about how afterwards one of them reached out to the other. They had a direct conversation. They closed the loop. And I was like, I didn't even have to be involved at all. This is amazing. So that's probably the best tool in that way.
I think I've been on the other side of that before, where I was working in a team where somebody felt that I wasn't doing something correctly, but they didn't tell me. So then it came up in a review 6 months later that, oh, on this project you did. And at that point, it's been so far in the past, you can't even remember it well enough to know what the problem was and whether or not it was fair feedback or not. And I think that's one of the things that I think always helps everybody is that you've got to give the feedback almost straight away, because then there's action that can be taken. And I think it's much more embarrassing in a way to be told you did something wrong 6 months later, because you can't apologize. You don't remember the situation well enough to really make a difference. So I really think that is important. Like wherever you are, it's just, you've got to say things at the time rather than let them build up and fester.
Well, and then let's say you and I have been working together on a project for 6 months and I find out at the end of it that you had this feedback. Now I'm like replaying every interaction and being like, that's what he was thinking that whole time. He was like, oh, Nathan's not doing his job. He's kind of mailing it in as a designer, like whatever it is. I'm like, now I'm like reimagining all these past scenarios with this new information that I have. And it's like, oh, I wish you would have just told me. You know?
It damages trust, like as well, between colleagues. And as well, like it's been a pleasure talking to you today. And I know you've got your own podcast and you interview creators, or people like me in a way. Can you tell us a bit about why you did that too? Like, what's the reasoning behind you doing a podcast on top of building a SaaS company?
Yeah. So the podcast is called Art of Newsletters. And I wanted to do two things. Three, I guess. I wanted to personally learn what everyone was doing with newsletters these days. I think in starting ConvertKit, I was building for myself. And then I kind of stepped out of that market over time, right? When I started it, I was on the cutting edge of what people were doing with newsletters and growing an audience. And then if you spend all your time building a tool for that, you're no longer the best source for market research. So it's like, okay, let me find out now what everyone's doing. So that was one thing. Second thing is to meet a bunch of new people. A podcast is the best way to meet new people, right? You and I haven't spoken before. You've used ConvertKit for a while now, right? Like all of this. But it's in the podcast that we actually get a chance to meet and do that. Probably podcasts and conferences are the two best ways to meet fellow creators. And then the third thing is that I wanted to create the content that other like people in the ConvertKit community would follow along and learn from, right? So if they are trying to think, how do I grow I built my newsletter 5,000 subscribers. How do I get it to 10 to 20? They could follow along with all of that. And so those are kind of the three main reasons. I guess if there was a fourth secret reason, it would be if I meet a bunch of these creators, like half of them are already on ConvertKit, half aren't. The ones that aren't on ConvertKit, maybe I can get them on ConvertKit. And that's actually worked quite well. So, just a way of getting more dream creators using the platform.
Yeah, because you've got people like Tim Ferriss on the platform, for example. And was that a direct outreach, or did he start using it by himself just because he'd read reviews and he decided that was the best platform to use?
Yeah, Tim's been on the platform for a long time. I'm trying to think how long, at least 4 years, if not 5 years. That was a result of a lot of direct outreach. That was, actually, this is from Ryan Delk, who's a friend of mine and is on our board of advisors. He's got a great startup now called Primer, which is in the homeschooling space that I'm an investor in, but he's helped ConvertKit a ton. He talked about this idea of if you're trying to reach someone famous, you don't want to reach them. You want to reach the right-hand man of that person, right? Who is the person who actually runs this all for them. And this is the exact method that we use to get Tim Ferriss, who else? Arnold Schwarzenegger, Tim McGraw, like a bunch of these people. You don't try to reach out to Arnold Schwarzenegger. That's ridiculous. But behind the scenes, who's the behind the scenes person that no one knows who they are, who actually runs everything? Once you learn that, then, you try to meet up with them. In Tim's case, I found out who it was, went, flew to their city, got coffee with them, talked through it. And it was sort of this long process of, showing that we were a better tool. They moved over from GetResponse, I believe, when the email list was like 300,000 people. And now I think Tim just talked about it being well over 1 million subscribers now. So that's the process for a really big name, is you find out who the right-hand person is and get to know them and kind of ignore the celebrity, right? Because the celebrity has too many people reaching out to them.
In the podcast itself, has there been any lessons that you've learned from the people you've been interviewing that you didn't expect that have changed from when you were a creator yourself back in the day?
There's a few things. People are growing audiences much faster than they used to. They're earning significantly more, which is interesting. Just like people are building a 50,000 subscriber or 100,000 subscriber newsletter way faster, and then earning hundreds of thousands of dollars, in some cases $1 million a year, off of the newsletter, which is wild. I'm trying to think what else. Years ago, brand sponsorships for newsletters wasn't really a thing. Now it's a pretty big and growing channel, and that's fantastic. So there's a bunch of things along those lines that I think are changing. I'd have to think about it more, of what trends have changed.
What's been your favorite conversations you've had with people, if you had to pick out a few?
Oh, that's a good question. I just recorded one this morning with Brendan Dunn, who's been a longtime friend, and he's probably like the foremost expert on email automation, personalization, that kind of thing. He's built a lot of great products for ConvertKit. Another one would be Packy McCormick. He's got a really popular Substack called Not Boring. And I love just his approach to everything. He kind of breaks a lot of the common molds. There's so many at this point. There's been 50 in the last year, so I'd have to think about it some more. Another one that actually hasn't come out yet, but I think it'll drop like this week or so, or next week, somewhere in there, is Rachel Rogers. She wrote a book called We Should All Be Millionaires. And she just has such a fun, infectious energy. And she's built an audience-based business to over $10 million a year. And so it's cool to see how that's all scaled. And I've known her for 5 or 6 years. She's spoken at our conference and all of that. So it's just fun to have an opportunity to catch up with friends as well, right? Because everyone's busy. And so you're like, I don't quite have time for just a normal catch-up call. But if we hit do it in Riverside and hit record, then sure, it's totally worth it.
Obviously, you've written books as well. Is there any one book that you'd recommend for entrepreneurs listening today to help guide them in their process?
Well, it depends on what you're trying to do. My favorite book that if you haven't read it, you totally should have on my desk right now. It's going to get blown out. It's called Anything You Want by Derek Sivers. It's a super short read. It's 84 short pages. It is not a big book. So I love that one. That would be what I would most recommend.
So it's been a pleasure to talk to you, Nathan. Where can people hear more about you and more about ConvertKit and what ConvertKit is up to?
Yeah, so go to convertkit.com to, if you're growing an audience or if you have a newsletter or a podcast and so whether starting a new email list or migrating over to us, that'd be one thing. My blog is at nathanbarry.com, and Barry's Barry. And then I'm also actively growing my Twitter. That's a fun thing to do. And so I'm just at Nathan Barry on Twitter. And then if you're listening to podcasts, check out my podcast. It's called The Art of Newsletters. It can be found anywhere that podcasts are found. So that's pretty much the whole roundup.
Thank you again for coming on.
Thanks for having me.